Welcome to this edition of Sarter TV. I'm Tracy Fitzpatrick. We're excited to have as our guest today Loreen Arbus. She's an Emmy-nominated executive producer, the first woman to head up programming at a major U.S. network, author of 6 books. She's an activist, a philanthropist, and renowned tango dancer. And that's just a few of her accomplishments. Loreen, thank you so much for joining us today.
What a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So let's just start from the beginning. How did your background and upbringing influence you into becoming such a fearless trailblazer?
Well, I was very fortunate, extremely fortunate. My mother was very, very strict, but when it came to independence, she gave me a lot of rein. She was strict about how I dressed, how I acted, so on and so on. But I traveled across the country with a girlfriend when I was about 13 in a bus, which was pretty cool.
So you just snuck out of the house and
No,
traveled?
they said, you're off on the road. The mistake I made was that the person I chose was Orthodox Jewish, and I had no idea that I was going to have to rein it in because we couldn't do anything on Friday night or Saturday, and we had to eat special places for her needs and so on. But my parents were very, very encouraging of me to pursue what made me happy and what was meaningful to me. The other thing that they did, which I think is just priceless, is they instilled in me at the earliest age the mission to give back, and that was invaluable. I didn't get an allowance. I worked for whatever money I had, picked weeds and whatever. I put stones in the bag with the weeds so that I could get the money faster. It was heavy. And, but I got to choose who would be the beneficiary of my great amounts of money, $1, $1.50.
You've been quoted as saying that as a female, you have always felt like a marginalized, nonconformist person. Now, what made you feel this way? How did you overcome it? And do you feel that these feelings made you even more determined to achieve your goals in life?
Being marginalized was painful and extremely motivating because I was always on the outside, looking in, not necessarily wanting to join because I've always been really independent and I didn't like the rules that I saw oftentimes looking from the outside, but it strengthened me. I was marginalized from several standpoints. I was the only Jewish girl in an Episcopalian school, a lot of prejudice. In Greenwich, Connecticut, a very prejudiced community, at least at that time. I had an older sister born with severe disability. No one wanted to visit my home, and people shunned her, and by association shunned the family. My mother was brilliant and accomplished so much, but she was bipolar and a very angry person. And if the discomfort with my older sister wasn't enough, the parents of the other, it was an all-girls school, the other girls didn't want their children coming over to my house because my mother was terrifying. So we were marginalized across the board. But it made me able to identify on a deep level with people in a really meaningful way, because those who don't have voice, I think it's my passion and desire to give them voice, to help them have voice, to be their voice. So it was a wonderful thing to be marginalized, painful though it was, and it was very painful.
Now, what advice would you give to other girls and women who may be feeling this way?
You have to dig deep inside. That might sound superficial and patronizing even, but you have to dig deep inside and know and feel confident of your capabilities, your strengths. And I have had a long road, and I'm still working on it, to come to really like myself. People say things and it just goes right off me because I don't believe when they're saying really good things. I often just don't believe them. I question it. But it's getting better. You have to really believe in yourself.
What life lessons prepared you most for your role as the first female to be promoted to head of programming at networks Showtime and Lifetime?
paramount for me was the support of two great men who worked together through many incarnations as heads. One was above the other at Showtime, and then Cable Health Network, and then Lifetime. They worked for the parent company, Viacom, but they were my immediate boss. Both of them were, even though it was not a direct report to both. And they were so supportive. They did not see gender difference. They just saw that I could do and believed in me that I could do the job. And that was huge. I didn't know how to do a lot of things, well, a huge amount of things. Partly it was style. I've always been my own person, but I didn't know to what degree that would work against me. They were fine. They let it go. One time, one of these two gentlemen said to me in an email he wrote back, he said, "Could you make your email less florid and more to the point?" I didn't know that's how you do email, and that's how you communicate in a business context. Boom, boom, boom. I was writing little essays infused with poetry, kind of. They were so supportive, and that was just the greatest, that they took a chance. And then the chairman of the board of Viacom one day calls me up, Ralph Baruch, and he says, I was newly on the job, and no matter how far along you are, there are certain people who call you or who you meet where you feel, oh my gosh, this is really scary. And when he called, I thought, what have I done? Immediately, what did I do wrong? And he introduces himself on the phone, and he says to me, I'd like to give you an assignment. Anything at all, of course, thank you. And my assignment was just so adorable, was he wanted me to be his eyes and ears when any of his executives were interviewing someone for a creative job. This is a company that is very diversified in syndication, network television. They made pilots, they made movies. I mean, they're all facets of entertainment. And they had not had any success in selling their original programming. Their success was in selling programming that existed. It was spun off by from CBS as a distribution company, and they knew, Ralph Baruch knew that business of distribution of existing programming, All in the Family and just a whole lot of other CBS shows. But they weren't able to identify good ideas to develop and to invest in, and they didn't find the right people. He says to me, "You're so colorful, I think you would be a better judge than any of the folks I have as to who would be able to be creative and give direction to our company." Who would have known that being colorful would work for me? And
Right.
It's worked both for me and against me in life.
Okay, so you were running these departments back in the 80s and 90s. Fast forward to today in the male, again, dominated entertainment industry. Did you see sexism during your climb? And if so, how did you deal with it? And look what's going on today at Fox and other networks. Has much changed?
No, no. And the statistics are painfully comparable today as to what they were 20 years ago, with a little tiny bit of a margin of difference. Martha Lowson, for years and years out of San Diego, looks at all the jobs above the line and the executives and what they're paid, and the difference in media, the difference is negligible. But I experienced sexism in many ways. The biggie was I was never paid what I should have been paid. And part of the problem was I didn't know. I had no one else to communicate with. One of my great learning lessons was when a woman, one of the few, who was at a network, NBC, said to me, "Loreen, how much do you make?" And I said, "Christine, that is such a rude question. I'm not going to tell you." And she says to me, big learning lesson, "Loreen, if we don't share information, how are we going to have the ability to negotiate for ourselves? We have to share information and help each other." And she was so right. So the discrimination more often took place in a lot of things which laws today would come after people for doing. a fair amount of manhandling. I'd be pat on the top of my head. What? Somebody come along and rub my shoulders. I didn't ask. They didn't ask. They just did it. I mean, there was a lot of this kind of sexism that was by innuendo it was just there in a lot of ways. And sometimes it's very hard to know how to interpret the physical proximity. I mean, I've always felt it's very peculiar that we shake hands with women, but we embrace men, and the men embrace us immediately. Where does that shaking hands and embracing, where is that line of demarcation? And then if you're embracing someone at a dinner party, the next day in the office, are you embracing them or keeping your distance? It's very awkward, a double standard, very awkward.
Now, what advice would you give to women that are experiencing sexism today in the workforce?
Choose your battles carefully. Don't respond right away. Think about the situation. Talk with a few trusted friends. Make sure it is what you think it is, which might sound peculiar to me to say, but we don't always know. And if we act or react impulsively, we can make a horrible blunder. We really need to think through what we're experiencing and discuss what would be the most effective way to handle it. It depends on the company and the structure. I mean, going to human resources certainly is an alternative. In my case, I would have gone to either of the two men. They were very, and I did have a problem with one man who was under them. They were very open and objective. You just need to know where to turn, but you have to think about it very carefully. And you can't protest everything. You have to be selective.
Now, when you were heading up Lifetime, Showtime, did you encourage women to enter to leadership positions?
Oh, yes. And hired a fair number.
Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I've hired quite a lot of women, and when I would go to meetings, I'm in a lot of guilds: the Writers Guild, Producers Guild, the Authors Guild, the Caucus for Producers, Directors, and Writers. Just a lot of different. At meetings, I'd be asking the questions. Well, how many people with disability are on this or that committee? Where are the women? The Academy, I was on a governor for the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, the folks who give out the Emmys. Why are there no women governors? I mean, I ask the questions always and call it out. Try to do it in a constructive way. Example, for a lot of years there was an organization that hosted a monthly luncheon with a double-tiered dais where they presented either a speaker or a panel. It might be on sports, and they would have the heads of sports for all the networks, or they'd have programming people. And I never saw a minority, and I never saw a woman, who is a minority in most situations, quite frankly. So I wrote to the gentleman who was the head of, he was in charge of the luncheons, and he was very gracious. He got it. What I did was I first gathered a few female friends, and I said, what can we do? And there were a range of ideas. But I decided the thing we didn't want to do is antagonize him. We want to work with him and help him. So in my letter to him, I wrote and said, I've noticed that there aren't any minorities and women on your dais, 2 dais. I thought it would be helpful for you to have some names of people to consider. Perhaps you don't know these people.
A proactive approach.
A proactive approach. And I did a little bio on each person. I mean, they had one woman, Suzanne DePaz, who's a renowned producer, and she is the person who discovered, and Barry Gordy will be the first to say it, she discovered the Jacksons. And she was a twofer, I called her, because she is African-American and a woman. So they could get rid of 2 categories with Suzanne on every dais. But to broaden the scope. And I chose not to be as cynical as I was tempted to be, because I think that we often don't go beyond our own comfort zone with who we know. We don't meet or interact with or become more intimate with people who are not like us. it's just a fact of humankind. And I thought this person, head of the luncheon, could be helped, and he was.
And on the topic of leadership, Gloria Steinman says, Loreen Arbus is the woman who not only contributes to circles, she creates the circles. Explain to us what she means by that.
Well, I have to first say I worship Gloria. She is beyond amazing, icon, 80-something going on 40-something. She was talking about the fact that I'm a major networker. I don't mean that to pat myself on the back. It's just something I live and breathe. I bring people together. I'm a connector. Women, others, other minorities, people who are marginalized, even dogs. I'm having my annual doggy birthday party in LA. And a lot of networking actually can take place just through the doggy birthday party. When we find out what a person's other interests are, it's amazing the things that we then can get accomplished because we have, barriers have been broken down. And so networking is really important. People starting out may say, I don't know enough people to network. Well, if you meet one or two people with whom you have something in common, whether it's creating a women's network, of women first starting out in the area of your chosen field or where you've landed on the interim basis, that's the beginning of a network. And this may sound trite, but this is so important. Greet and warmly greet and sincerely greet everyone you meet along the way. How do you do? It's so nice to see you. Tell me your name, to the receptionist, to the person who's bringing the coffee. You never know. And it's happened to me that the head of programming ultimately at NBC was a neighbor who in a million years, if I hadn't befriended, a neighbor in the office. It just was an incredibly significant moment that we became friends.
Can you give us an example of people you perhaps have brought together through your networking to companies making successful, I guess, shall we say, connections?
Well, I bring a lot of people together who have the commonality of interest in the world of disability. And then I sort of subtly, eventually, after they feel comfortable with me and whatever mission I'm on at that moment, I then tap into their connections and or their resources and they help me raise money. They become members of a committee that I'm on. I'm the founder chair of a luncheon that ran 15 years until last year when I stepped down, and it was called Women Who Care, and we raised money by recognizing women of accomplishment. We raised money for people with disability, people of all ages, for United Cerebral Palsy of New York, and building that committee was imperative to, having a network that I could draw upon. And you can't go to the same people over and over and over again. So I've had to build many, I feel, intuitively, many networks so that I wasn't asking for money or involvement, support from the same people all the time.
How much has really changed in the workplace for women since your days of running program back in the 80s and 90s?
A little, maybe, but it's really negligible.
And why do you think that is still the case?
The one change is there have been a few women subsequent to my landing the position of head of programming. There have been a few women who've been heads of programming, a few women heads of networks. There's a woman who founded USA Networks and Sci-Fi Networks, Kay Koplovitz, a very remarkable person and dear friend. But, so that's major. But women who can say yes to big budgets, to green lighting projects, whether features or television, are so minuscule. And there's so much padding, so much hierarchy in terms of people. It's hard to know where the decision lies, where the buck stops, but it usually does not stop with a woman.
Did you ever see women sabotaging each other because out of fear of there's not enough room for all of us in this organization? Did you ever pick up on that?
I'm not going to play Pollyanna, My truthful answer is no, but I have heard many women talk about it. I have no ability historically to relate to that. Women have been fantastically supportive, and we've helped each other. And I probably sound really naive, and as I already mentioned, Pollyanna, because I really have only experienced the goodness of women and women's networks.
Do you notice a big difference in how men and women lead in corporate America?
Yes and no. I think women are extremely accomplished and can lead equally, and do. But I think stylistically there are differences. I think women think more about the risk before they jump in and make a decision. I think men are much more impulsive. And there's a lot of research to back that up. A lot of research at Harvard in particular that I know about. Women are more supportive of others than men. This is not corporate, but in the medical world, I support grants that go to women researchers and in the world of medicine at Harvard. And over again, I've been told, usually by men, that the women have more interest from others, from men, in joining their labs because the women make it a collaborative atmosphere. And it's so cool, it's so wonderful, because it's so hard for women to get money, to get funded for their labs compared to men. In the world of science, it's horrible. But that they are more in demand, how great is that?
Okay, after heading up various programming departments, you then went on to launch your own programming company, Loreen Arbus Productions.
Yes.
What are some projects that are important to you?
Well, we only do nonfiction. And backstory, there was a man named John Hendricks who was buying up documentaries. This is 20-some years ago. And much like Ted Turner, the founder of the first ever all-news network, people scoffed at John Hendricks and at Ted Turner. He's crazy, they said. And John Hendricks was so prescient because he knew there was a market for documentaries. And he didn't have to spend a lot of money, but he bought so many that it ended up being a sizable amount of money. He just felt that this form of program, which had been without any, it was sort of a filler, and it was those people who could live on the margin with no income virtually, working 5, 6, 7 years on their project. He just felt that there was an inherent importance and value, and it could be monetary. So he today would be acknowledged as the founder of the largest network in the world, which is Discovery Communications. There are over 30 networks part of the Discovery aegis. And I think documentaries have really come into their own. When you asked me earlier, have things changed? That's one area that has really significantly changed. There's money to be gotten and much more interest in documentaries. And there's a woman at Home Box Office, Sheila Nevins. She's been there close to 30 years. And she's threatening to resign next year. And I said, you just can't. You are a documentary for the networks. And they've done such innovative and important and daring subjects that they've tackled. And the audience is there for them, which is exciting. I love that area. And it's the closest you can get to truth.
What are some of the ways that women can identify enterprising skills they may already possess, especially if they're starting their own company?
Well, this is really rudimentary, but I think we all need to sit down and make a list with 2 columns. Things I don't do well, things I excel at or could demonstrate that I could excel at. Actually, you should make 3 columns and separate those. Because a lot of times we have talent, but we don't have a position where we get to show that our talent is in that area. We are sitting on our talents. So I think if we really have a heart-to-heart with ourselves and are honest about it, we'll find we have much more talent than we realize. The things I don't do well column is really important. I worked for someone who was brilliant, creative, incredibly visionary, but he also thought he could manage budgets and do more than he really could. And he got into a lot of trouble because he was taking money from this department and putting it over into the areas he loved, the creative area. But meanwhile, marketing and PR and other areas were just, decimated and had no money. And he didn't know what he didn't know. It's so important that we surround ourselves with people who are really good. My expertise, I can do it on a rudimentary level. I can do budgets and oversee the numbers. I don't like it. I don't shine at it. It is not my strength. So I always have hired people who are really good at crunching numbers around me. Isn't it amazing that we have a health bill yet again on the floor, about to be, and we're asking people to vote on a bill? We don't know what it costs. What is that? You have to know what things cost. And not only that, you have to have a plan such that if, one of the great lessons I learned, you have to think in a really negative way. What are all the things that could go wrong, that may not happen? So you have answers, so you're prepared.
And how can they develop those skills further?
Really think through your plan and the steps that it would take. Not try too much too soon. Ask people with great expertise what they would do, how they did what they did. Read a lot. I mean, these are all pretty basic things I'm saying, and I apologize that there's no breakthrough answer here, but confidence goes a long way. Women do a strange thing. When you're in a big conference or in a classroom even, women go, I just have one question. What is that apology for? I have a question. Stop apologizing for your very existence. Really important to be confident and not stupid, but confident.
And how can women best utilize their peer networks as far as entrepreneurs?
Resources, advice, connections. They're incredibly important. When you don't know where to turn, you turn to your networks in different areas. I'm involved with many. Some are international in scope, some are specific, as I already mentioned, to disability or to minority rights, minority issues, to women and girls, very high on my list. If one of my loves of my life, my two little dogs, were to become ill with something I didn't understand, and I did my research, but I didn't know next steps, I have a huge network of animal lovers and people who rescue animals. I can call for someone to say, what would you do under these circumstances? And I've had, one dog I have has had, she's the dog with 9 lives. And I've had so many brushes with fluke, life-threatening circumstances with her. And my friends came to the rescue.
Okay, you were networking way before social media came into play. How has your means of networking changed now with the advent of social media? Has it grown exponentially for someone like you? Or you don't even harness it?
What is no, I haven't really harnessed it. But I have people in my office and around me who know that world, and they counsel me and advise me. And I'm dyslexic, which has made it a little more difficult, to put it mildly, to go through life. And I love the fact that your founder, Russell Sartor, is all about learning. We learn in different ways, and for me, learning has been such a huge struggle if it wasn't experiential. As I'm not a reader, I have had lifelong difficulty reading. So I have people around me who buttress me up and take on those things that I need to be able to do. So I learned Facebook because I wanted to be able to communicate with my tango network through Facebook, and we have very active tango community all over the world, and I had to learn it. And my friends spent hours and hours teaching me, and we worked until the pizza place in the neighborhood, the one that was open the latest, closed at 2:30 in the morning. And we had the last pizza and the last beer, and we were celebrating. The next morning I call her up, she was sleeping, and I awakened her. She said, what is it? I said, I've forgotten everything you taught me. She said, no, you haven't. We'll go slowly and we'll go over it again as many times as you. I'm a different type learner.
What are some of the ways in which one can lead and motivate an enterprising team? How did you do it?
Inclusivity. That is, personally, I think the most important word in the English language is diversity. Close runner-up is inclusivity. And how you can motivate people is, I say to everyone who works with me, what do you think of this idea? Do you like this? Whether it's my housekeeper or my assistants, what do you think about this storyline? What would you like to know more about? What are we missing here? I get feedback from everyone. It's really important to keep your eye on what it is you want to accomplish. You just can't put it all out there and have it in this melange of vague, information coming in. But I get more ideas and more direction and more energy from sharing. My first job that I had was working for somebody who's truly iconic, Helen Gurley Brown. And she was the publisher of Cosmopolitan magazine. And I learned so much from her in terms of style and inclusivity. She had outside of her office a little box with a hole. Anytime we wanted, we could drop a note in there with suggestions or concerns, problems. How wonderful is that, that number one person would read what we had, cared what we had to say, and then in her handwriting, she would write back a little note. Loreen, this is a really good idea. Bring it up in the staff meeting. Loreen, it's too soon to do this idea again. We did it 2 years ago. It was fantastic, instant feedback. And then she included everyone in the staff meetings. They were very quaint. They were held in her office, no conference room. The senior editors had the big chairs. The junior editors had the couch. The rest of us, the lowlies, had the floor, but it didn't matter. We had pillows we could sit on or lean against, and we were part of the family. And it really was a family. It was wonderful. And to this day, I will always say thank you to her for giving me that experience of inclusivity. It doesn't make you less to share or to ask. It makes you more.
Now, for women entrepreneurs, can you share some efficient techniques to improve upon stakeholder management, including investors?
Knowing your numbers, rehearsing a ton. You can't just walk into a room, even if you know your numbers, and start selling. You have to know when and how and where to give the small talk a moment, to present your idea. Women have an unfortunate habit of starting at the beginning and going through till the end. No. You have to state what you need people to hear up front. Offer a little detail. Women tend to offer more detail than is necessary. It's interesting when you go around a room and you hear the women introduce themselves versus the men. The men do a better job of it, I have to admit. So do your homework about the person you're meeting with. Know everything you can find out about them. You never know how that's going to be helpful. Incidental detail, articles that have been written on them, do that research. It's really important.
What are some effective ways to negotiate to protect your interests as a founder, for example, your production company? And can you share an example with us?
Have a good lawyer. Costs money, but it is really and truly critically important. And if you are a lawyer, don't necessarily be your own lawyer. An example. I've had a lot of ideas and projects stolen right out from under me. I protect myself putting everything in writing, maybe to an excessive degree, with the date. Sometimes I mail things to myself, so I have the stamp on the sealed envelopes. It's important. Mm-hmm. So one day I was pitching a project to a network, and it was a project that I had gone out and had interviews, a reality show, interviews with several people, one of which was on tape, so it would show how we would do what we were proposing to do. And the person I interviewed called me and said, you know, somebody else was in here asking us to tell the same story again. Long story short, that network had taken my idea and given it to someone else. And they used the exact sample. That was unfathomable, that they didn't even seek out other examples. They chose to use the same people, same examples for their proposal, their pilot, which they were going to do in-house. So I, as an independent producer, was royally screwed. And I was very lucky. I had a partner at that time who was a major advertiser. And they stood up for the idea, for me. Not everybody can have those circumstances. And I don't know if there's anything anybody can learn from it other than forearm yourself best you can. And never be naive. I'm not a negative person. I'm not a cynical person. Not at all. Very upbeat and very positive, very optimistic.
I get that.
Very. But you do have to think, and one of my early learning lessons was from the head of production at one of the networks who hired me, and who said to me, I want you to think of everything that can go wrong on every production you're now going to be involved with. How negative is that? But he was so right. Then you're prepared. Mm-hmm. That is the best preparation you can have.
When I gave an introduction about you, I talked about the many things you're involved with. You're activist, philanthropist, founder of new companies, and you also find time to sit on dozens of nonprofit boards, including Women Moving Millions and the Women's Media Center. What effect do you think the Trump administration is going to have on female-centered organizations?
A whole lot of us have been in mourning since it was announced he won. And this is not overly dramatic. Many, many women have been moved to tears. Many men have joined us in our mourning. And picking ourselves up and doing that which is proactive is no small challenge. I mean, the world is now divided into pro-Trump and anti-Trump. There's nothing else. That's what defines and how people define themselves. It's shocking. When we find out that someone voted for Trump, that person immediately becomes the enemy or not, the ally.
Yes, we're divisive like the government is now.
Absolutely. And the word chaos has been used over and over. This is a really chaotic and dangerous time that we're in. You'll get a kick out of this. I got an invitation yesterday from Melania Trump for lunch at the White House next week.
I hope you're going.
No, I'm not going on principle. I can't be someone who's a hypocrite, and I'm just not. And if I was there, it would implicate me in the thinking that this administration has perpetuated, initiated in most cases, and perpetuated. And it's not what I stand for. And my not going is not meant to be a rejection of her. And I got a great kick, as I already said, of getting the invitation. But if my name was listed with a lot of others who attend this luncheon, I would feel like a traitor. I mean, he does not stand for being kind to a person with disability and being sensitive to who they are.
But you don't think you could open up a dialogue and set the tone for a different type of agenda? What an opportunity.
That's a great question. But I would think she would feel under attack, and I would feel that the forum is not necessarily appropriate to bring it up to her. Not necessarily. If someone were to meet me and say, oh, you were at the White House at that luncheon, I would immediately no longer represent the person I am. As you yourself said, this has been the most divisive administration and experience ever, and the violence that's erupted. For me, one of the great, great experiences in the last couple of months since he was elected was watching the Muslim whose mosques, their places of worship, many of them have been destroyed, desecrated. Jewish community reaching out to the Muslim, and vice versa, with so many cemeteries Jewish cemeteries desecrated and temples and places of worship bombed and threatened, and so many lives threatened. The Jews have been welcomed by the Muslims. This is wonderful. This is what we should be about. This is actually what, going way back in time, it was all about between African Americans, so marginalized, and Jews, so marginalized, who came together in Selma and throughout parts of our history. That's what I love, is when people speak to the hearts of each other. And I think you're absolutely right. I need to take a stand. I do, and I'm planning to do more, and more in that regard, but in other ways, not necessarily in a confrontational way, by supporting through my own philanthropy and other means that which I want to stand for.
Do you feel successful in your own right and that you have accomplished your goals thus far?
I'd be a living zombie or dead if I felt I am successful. Once you start feeling that this part of my life or something in my life is done, complete, it's the beginning of the end. No, 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 no. Always have to have goals. Always have to have more that you want to reach for. And I do.
What's been the biggest disruptor in your life?
One of the good and great disruptions in my life was going to a club in bombed out Vietnam, LA. It was in a godforsaken area. And I would go to this dance club periodically with a friend of mine who was a member. And one night there was a couple who danced tango, and I heard the music, saw this art form, and I was head over heels. My heart was just thumping. I was head over heels in love with it and passionate about it. And I had to study it, and my studies led me to pursue, once the teacher I had found was not someone I could continue with, then I went to Mecca, to Buenos Aires with my dance partner and pursued the study. The disruption was that, like my dogs, it made me realize, as busy as I am and was, and as much as I have on my plate, there's always a way to accommodate that which you need and feel on an intuitive level, and to give balance in your life. And I get down on the floor when I have piles, mounds of work to do. I am down on the floor playing with and talking with my babies. They're 5 and 2 years old, but they're my babies. And just wasting time, but it's the most efficient use of time. It renews me.
Therapeutic.
It's therapeutic. And with tango, it brought into perspective a balance and a physical outlet, because everything was up here, intellectual, and through the eyes, through the ears, but tango was through the heart. And I think, especially at that time, as a woman in business with no other women to be found, I was kind of on automatic pilot. You know, I never dressed the dress and looked the look. I'm not a Chanel type person. You look so gorgeous and so appropriate, not something I could do.
And you look so amazing. I love the look.
Well, but it's just not something I can.
But corporate America is not used to that.
Not ready for me. And tango gave me an outlet to be the defiant person I am, but to bring it together in a way that had meaning, and was, it incorporated more aspects of it allowed me to incorporate more aspects of myself.
Okay, one of your other many passions is tango dancing.
That's right.
So tell us, how did that help you in finding balance in your life?
I'm both a choreographer and a performer of Argentine tango, not to be confused with ballroom tango, totally different. It is the mother of all tango. And tango, I think it's important to understand as much as we can where a person comes from, their roots, and the cultural context in which we experience different things. Argentine tango was born of immigrants, very poor immigrants. Many of them were not allowed to continue to live or prosper in their own countries, and they fled from different parts of Europe to Argentina. And it's no accident or coincidence that this is a dance of defiance, of strong individualism, a vocabulary that had never been seen before. It comes from roots of dissidence and rejection. And I gravitated towards it, not knowing that was, but it was inherently in what I experienced in the music and in the dance. And how it has changed my life is part of what I talk about in my TED Talk is profound. I think one of the brilliant aspects of tango, Argentine tango, are actually the silences when you're not dancing. Because we keep talking and moving, and fast food America has to have more, nonstop. In tango, we have silences. And we listen to our heart. We dance close with somebody, heart to heart. American tango is hip to hip, and you're this way. What is that about? This is a dance that comes from the heart, literally and figuratively. And you change roles. You become the leader, and then you are the follower. You're never only one. You're multidimensional, as a male, as a female. Somebody has to be in charge, so there is a leader, but the follower is giving input all the way, and the leader can't lead if the follower isn't listening and contributing. And that is inclusivity that is at the highest and most profound form, in my opinion.
What advice would you give to young women just starting out in their careers?
Know that there's a price to pay for being yourself. My advice would be to be true to yourself, first and foremost. The price to pay is you may get less money. I did. The price to pay is that people may not want to sit with you at a company party. Oftentimes they didn't. I went to the person who was doing the seating at a particular event, which was our annual big fundraiser for one of the nonprofits I serve on, and I said to her, you know, you always put me in Siberia, and I've noticed that, I understand, because I'm a little too radical and different, but you know, you could actually utilize me. I can help you raise more money because I will make people at that table where you put me feel more comfortable and open up and experience life a little differently, because they'll have more fun and they'll go into places they don't ordinarily go at their conversation at the tables where they frequent, because they're sitting with people who are just like them. I'm a disruptor. I didn't use that word, but that's where it comes into play. And once I have them challenged and enjoying the challenge, and I'm very careful, I don't want people to get hurt. I don't want to be mean ever to anyone in life, but I like to uproot and you know, experiment. And once I find my way to them, then I can ask them, have you thought about what would interest you as subject matters for our panels in the future, and so on and so forth. And she started putting me at the A table, and it turned out to
You're
be
in the front of the room now, not the back.
Absolutely. It turned out to be good for all of us.
So what's next for Loreen Arbus? Will we see another disruptor phase
I
for
hope
the greater
so.
good?
I hope so. Where do I go from here? I never like to say more of the same. I don't like maintenance. I don't like status quo. I like change. I like startup, doing things differently than they've been done. Part of an amazing movement to get more and more women to support women financially. Women Moving Millions has raised over $500 million, and we're going for $1 billion of women contributing to causes that support women and girls all over the world. That's exciting. We're going to reach have a new threshold and reach new heights. More voices of people, and especially women with disability in media through the Women's Media Center, which was started by Gloria Steinem and Jane Fonda and Robin Morgan. so important. I put my money where my ideas are and my beliefs are, supporting more filmmakers who are going to make a difference with subjects they're willing to tackle and go through life with a greater consciousness about issues. And even if they're creating a funny, escapistic project on film or tape, they could still have, if it's live action or if it's animation, somebody in a wheelchair. Ah, just a moment. I want to change the dialogue. I see so many people, very evolved men and women, highly conscious men and women, nevertheless, who talk about, of all the Republican candidates, only one, Jeb Bush, spoke up for people with disability. I see so many people talk about minorities and are very conscientious and well-intended about being inclusive, and they name African Americans and they name Asian Americans, but they don't name the largest minority in the world, people with disability. I need to get that into the dialogue and vocabulary of people a lot more. That's just the tip of the iceberg of things that I'm working on.
Well, Loreen Arbus, you truly are an iconic trailblazer. Thank you so much for joining us
Don't make me
today.
older. Thank you.
And that does it for this edition of Sarder TV. We hope you enjoyed and learned something new today. Until next time, I'm Tracy Fitzpatrick. Thanks for watching.